perhaps we can have the panel discussion number 2 started. Natural reserve. Perhaps we can begin from Professor Nakamura from the University of Tokyo. Takamura, I'm sorry. Professor Takamura. And she also serves as the president of Central Environmental Council of Japan. And she will talk about Annex 6, how it is brought into force, and what progress Japan is making. Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'd like to appreciate the organizers, and KOPRI PCRC and the KOPRI. I going to talk about what is the status of the Japanese preparation for the ratification of Annex 6. You mean that it's a liability arising from the environmental emergency, and toward a 2026 ATCM. Actually, on my right side, Nakamura-san already talked about that is one of the issue that the Japanese government is now tackling. So that I point out the two things. I mean, factual situation. I mean, for the preparation first, and the most, in my sense, the most important issue or difficult issue for Japan to ratify it. And the first point is I promise, and also here we have two colleagues from the Ministry of Environment, with whom I'm working with, and Tanaka-san and Fukuhama-san, and also the Kitao-san, who in charge of this issue in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So we then confirm that we are preparing for the ratification toward the 2026, and we actually started the preparation quite a long ago, because I got involved in the negotiation of this liability annex with the Professor Shibata 20 years ago. And from that then on, the study group was established under the MOE, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they sometimes interrupted, but again, that started from the 2021. One of the trigger, frankly speaking, is the German ratification, because we feel that the German legal system is quite we got actually a long, historically speaking, the German legal system, for instance, the continental law system, in the civil law or in the administrative law, for instance, so that then they really started the preparation and looking into the other countries' ratification, national implementation. So we consider that we have a law relating to protection of the environment in Antarctica. That is we have an intention to amend of the law relating to this protection of environment in Antarctica for Japan to ratify it. That is the idea. So as maybe you know, maybe you have, there are some those who are not really familiar with this liability annex liability. This liability applied to the environmental emergency in the Antarctica, and which the activity under the scope is related to all activity, but for which as you know, advance notice under the Antarctic Treaty System is somehow the condition of the activity to be applied for this liability annex to be applied. So then I say all activity including scientific research activity and the tourism, and also that which include the the tourism vessels. So each party then they require each operator, I mean the operator or party, to take prompt and effective response actions. And in case that the operator could not take this kind of response action, then that's cause the obligation to pay for the cost. So for instance, if this someone took the response action in the place of the operator, in that case, the operator is liable to pay the cost of response action taken in its behalf by part. That is, I think, the point. I mean, the principle. In principle, then the operator have to pay, and if the operator cannot pay for that, cannot take the action. In that case, if someone took the action in its place, then the operator have to pay the cost to that the someone who took the response action. The main challenge for Japanese ratification, in my sense, is the liability under Article 6.2b, which is the non-state actor, non-state operator should have taken response action but did not, and that no one took the action for that. Even such case, the non-state operator shall be liable, pay some amount of money, especially this money that reflect as much as possible the cost of response action that should have been taken. So as I said, that the response action had not taken, but the operator have to pay for some money which reflect the cost of response action. So it's quite new for Japanese existing system. So that's I think from the legal point of view, one of the most important challenge for Japan. How to determine the amount to be paid by non-state operator? It's a related question because if government require the operator to pay for some amount, possibly the operator bring the complaint before national court about this governmental decision. Of course, we have an idea to somehow determine the cost to be paid through the procedure under for instance, ministry or Minister of Environment, but still, how to determine the amount is quite a tough task. I think it's quite similar for the international assessment for the cost paid by the non-state operators through the party, and maybe some, the very little amount should only paid, and it's okay or not, appropriate and comply with liability annex. I think it's, of course, a national question. Question for Japanese government, and also the question for how to assess the compliance with the liability annex. And of course, there are several other issues, involved. For instance, in the deliberation of the study group, some of you know that there are some kind of limit of liability under this liability annex. Already 20 years ago, then the limit is, this limit is not really reflect the possible necessary cost, for instance, for the restoration or some kind of the reparation. So such kind of issue may arise, at international level. But I think once this, the liability annex enter into force, I think there are some issue. Maybe somehow they adapt the provision or they improve, due to the 20 years ago agreed, liability annex. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Okay. Now, before we entertain any questions, we will go directly on to Vilekari. Okay?
Thank you. Please let me begin by thanking the PCRC and KOPRI for the invitation, for this hospitality, and for this wonderful opportunity to discuss key policy challenges in Antarctica. And thanks in particular to Professor Shibata and Dr. Shin, and to our distinguished speaker, Dr. Nakamura, for the keynote address. And I'd also like to congratulate Professor Takamura for the success of her study group. I'm very encouraged by the news. I hope the professor will take my best regards to the members of the group. In my speech, I also want to highlight the matter of environmental liability. It was the subject of our workshop here in Kobe last year, and I'm very pleased to see it continue here in this second workshop. My focus here in my few minutes is going to be on the importance of the implementation of the Antarctic, of the Annex 6 for the Antarctic Treaty System as a whole. As we heard, the issue with environmental liability is simply this: who should be legally responsible for addressing and remedying an environmental emergency, such as an oil spill in the Antarctic, and how, and according to which rules this should take place. Now, under current international law, the answer is unclear, because most international instruments where states agree about liability, they only apply within the territorial jurisdiction of states. Antarctica, therefore, needs its own international legal instrument to define and to enforce environmental liability. The good news is that, of course, this binding legal instrument exists. It's Annex 6 to the Environment Protocol. It was adopted by the ATCM in Stockholm in 2005. So therefore, the consultative parties in 2005 have already agreed on the legal details of environmental liability 20 years ago. But Annex 6 will enter into force only when all of those states that made it, the 28 consultative parties in 2005, when these states implement it in their national legislations and submit an instrument of acceptance to the depository. Now, the implementation procedure has been designed to be one of maximum flexibility, where each party can adopt its own suitable legal instruments and approaches, and this is what Professor Takamura's working group has been working on here in Japan. There has obviously been a very long delay in the implementation, so it wasn't supposed to take 20 years. At present, according to the latest numbers from the depository, 19 of the necessary parties have implemented the measure, with 9 more remaining. Now, remedying this situation is a common concern for the entire Antarctic legal community. First and foremost, because of the importance of environmental protection, but also to maintain the effectiveness and legitimacy of the Antarctic Treaty System in the eyes of the world, the wider world out there. And it is in this juncture that we, everyone in this room, come in. I believe that an open and constructive dialogue between lawyers and academics and professionals, public institutions, can have a significant impact in facilitating the implementation of Annex 6 in the remaining legislations. Now, I want to point out that, as far as I know, there has been no significant resistance or opposition to Annex 6 from the parties since it was adopted. So the parties have agreed on the details of liability. Instead, the challenge to countries seems to be more administrative, about how to bring this into effect domestically. Liability in Antarctica is not a very well-known topic. It seems quite complicated, and it's new to those who are meant to implement it domestically very often. So by offering advice and by keeping up the conversation, I believe that academics and lawyers can make genuine progress, or help the parties make genuine progress. So I think that the dialogue here in Kobe should continue on this topic as well, and we should keep bringing together the drafters of the annex, or knowledge from them, and also the experts who are working on its domestic implementation. Perhaps this could be a message to bring to the ATCM that this would be a useful thing to do. The upcoming ATCMs hosted by Japan and Korea would offer an excellent opportunity to advance the adoption of Annex 6 further. Progress among the Asian consultative parties would motivate the Antarctic community as a whole. So if we look back, we notice that implementations have often occurred in groups as governments inspire each other to take this next step. I would be very pleased if the work of the PCRC and KOPRI could help the parties demonstrate such leadership together. And this is all I had to say about this at this point. Please let me thank you all for listening, and once again, thanks for the invitation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That was a very good compliment to Professor Takamura's talk. And then we will turn to Natasha Gardner. She will talk about CEP agenda and role of science in SCAR. Please.
So, hi everybody here in the room, and also to everybody out there online listening. I'd also like to say thank you very much for having me here in Kobe. It's a real pleasure to be a part of this conversation. So, yeah, thank you very much. So I was given the brief to talk about the agenda items of the Committee for Environmental Protection, the CEP, and the role of science and SCAR in environmental decision-making. And to set the scene for this conversation, I can't help but go backwards in time, because when you think about most of the CEP's agenda items, a large part of their foundation is underpinned by science and the contributions of the science community and SCAR before the CEP was established in 1998. So SCAR was established itself in 1958 as a thematic organisation of the International Science Council, and it has since played an influential role in shaping the Antarctic environmental regime that we see today. So shortly after the treaty was signed, the science community had mobilised on issues of environmental concern, and by 1961, SCAR's Biology Working Group had already compiled a list of Antarctic species and areas that warranted special protection, which catalysed the negotiation and signing of the 1964 agreed measures for fauna and flora. And so I could continue to go on and list the various science groups within SCAR that have been pivotal in shaping the conservation and environmental protection instruments that were subsequently agreed. But I guess the main point that I'm making here is that SCAR has had this long-standing history of providing trusted and credible science advice to the Antarctic decision makers, without which I really do think the system would look very different to what it does today. But another key point I'd also like to raise with respect to SCAR's role is that prior to the establishment of the CEP, SCAR worked very closely with the ATCM to provide support to decision makers on many of the environmental issues and tasks that the CEP now leads on. And SCAR is still able to directly interact with the ATCM as stipulated in Article 10 of the protocol, for example. So when the CEP came into existence, SCAR and the CEP had a period of reorganisation towards establishing their working relationship going forward. And so today the CEP has what I think is a very busy agenda, as I think Indy also alluded to. It works on many environmental issues that require scientific input at multiple scales and also via multiple mechanisms and pathways. And when you look at the main items on the CEP's agenda, there really isn't an issue that the CEP deals with that doesn't require some form of research knowledge or scientific information. And the CEP, to help direct and prioritise its work, has developed a 5-year work plan as well as a climate change response work programme. And in order to help the committee itself articulate the information that it requires from the science community, it's also compiled a list of science knowledge and information needs for from across all of its work plans and documentation, which is available on the Secretariat website for, the science community, but also the general public to access. So there are these mechanisms in place that aim to facilitate the science policy interaction. But in the shifting world that we have been talking about, I think it's really timely to ask the question of whether or not the science policy relationship is effective enough in the face of increasing environmental and governance challenges in Antarctica. And in asking this question, I think we really need to consider what factors enable and hinder knowledge exchange between science and policy communities, as well as think quite deeply about what success looks like. And so my PhD research has actually addressed these exact questions. And so I'd just like to conclude by sharing just a couple of the key findings from the research that I've been doing with Professor Daniela Liggett and Dr. Neil Gilbert. So in terms of challenges at the science policy interface, many of our research participants, and also we've spoken about this in the room today as well, have spoken about this overshadowing effect of politics on science policy discussions, including those technical discussions that are taking place within the CEP. And that the politicisation of these discussions, as we've discussed as well, are sometimes manifesting in this weaponisation of scientific uncertainty to meet political ends or deliberately stall progress in those discussions. A second key challenge that we've identified, or perhaps you could also call this a simple inevitability, is that the parties invest asymmetrically in the system, including in their contributions at the science policy interface. So some of our study participants have expressed concern that only a small handful of countries are actually taking the lead on various environmental issues. But of course, the extent to which parties invest in the system is strongly linked to domestic priority settings and other socio-economic and political factors. But this does raise an interesting question about the potential need for more explicit capacity building initiatives and possibly also a need for more inward-looking practices from the parties with respect to the ways in which they choose to invest and allocate resource in their engagement within Antarctic affairs. So looking ahead, we identified the need to develop a clearer roadmap for science policy success. And part of that journey, as I said before, will be becoming clearer on what success actually looks like, but also thinking about reviewing and potentially innovating the social processes that need to underpin those science policy mechanisms that are already in place. So yeah, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
All right. Then we'll ask Keith to speak on governance responses to Antarctic tourism. You know, Keith has been very well known in the Antarctic Treaty Circle as a member of Dutch delegation, of course. Please. Yeah.
Thank you for your very kind words, and also thank you for your very kind words, and also for the invitation. Thank you, organizers, for this very efficiently organized and very interesting event. Also, given the diversity of the experts in the room and the high level, so many professors and the Director General, it's very much appreciated that I can be here by myself. So I'm very happy to be here. That's what I mean. Yeah, it's a great pleasure to speak about the natural reserve part of the workshop, because I regularly get the question from students, but also from others, and I sometimes also see it in literature, that the consensus rule in the system must actually be protecting the Antarctic environment very effectively, because you need consensus before you can do something in the Antarctic. That's the general idea that some students have, which is a misunderstanding, because we could have decided upon that when designating the Antarctic as a natural reserve devoted to peace and science in the protocol, but we did not. We kept Antarctica as an open access area, and we need consensus when we want something to be prohibited, such as, for instance, mining. And that decision-making process that we need is challenged in several ways, not only in the last few years, I think, because of geopolitics and other reasons. These are very important and they are very problematic, but there are also some other weaknesses, I think, in the system, at least that I have observed, that make that decision-making challenging. Just to mention a few, no common understanding of basic concepts. For instance, what are wilderness values? Are there common understandings of that? Or cumulative impacts? When it gets busier and busier in the Antarctic, it's very important to know what cumulative impacts are. And then we might say, okay, but then we are looking at the environment. And if there are environmental changes we are concerned about, we can take action. But no consistent monitoring takes place. So we promised each other to have a good monitoring efforts, but we are not actually having such a framework. And currently there is an ICG under the CEP operating to actually establish that. But the participation of members of the CEP is very, very low. Increase of uncertainties is caused by global challenges, climate change, but also pollution. And these gaps in knowledge are used by some parties in the past to actually change scientific-based decision-making into evidence-based decision-making, requiring evidence for the usefulness of decisions and actually pushing away the precautionary approach that is also characteristic for the Antarctic Treaty System. And what my concern is that these challenges have been apparent about at least 3 decades, and they also cumulative. So these cumulative in the sense that these challenges very often play a role together and strengthen each other. And that is, I think, happening, or that has been happening for the tourism and non-governmental activities debates. We have had these debates over more than 30 years. So 1992, there was already a proposal for an annex by 5 consultative parties. And it has a rich history, but we have not prevented tourism and non-governmental activities from growing unlimitedly to go to any place they want, except for Antarctic specially protected areas, but that's about 2% of the whole of the Antarctic. And there is also no limitation in terms of types of activities. So the diversification is also growing rapidly. So yeah, that is quite a challenge. And what I would hope is that in terms of a natural reserve, if we look at other natural reserves in the world, we take decisions, mostly on the basis of territoriality, but we take decisions on the size of tourism sector, on the forms of activities, on places to go, but also places not to go. And what I hope is that these challenges will not actually prevent us from having a very ambitious framework developed over the coming years. And I take the comment very seriously by the Director General that we should not jump into conclusions about legal forms and lose each other or lose ourselves in these discussions, but actually try to understand each other's positions and get to the substance and the concerns that we have to see how we could solve that, really in a manner of consensus making. And that probably brings us back to the basics. So if I would be able to mention these basics for myself as I see them in the system, and then I conclude, that would be not prioritizing national interest, but investing in strong cooperation in order to establish joint governance of a natural reserve in the interest of all mankind, and maybe also nature itself, in which we try to forecast developments and related concerns for the Antarctic values to ensure a proactive approach, and in which gaps in knowledge are not used as an excuse to postpone decision-making, but as reasons to be extra careful and to apply the precautionary approach. And I hope that the coming ATCMs will be able to bring us back to that basic, including the ATCM in Hiroshima. Thank you very much.
Okay, very good, very good. Now, in the interest of time, I will turn to Ileana Rodriguez, professor from University of Republic of Uruguay. Please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I plan to bring to the table an issue I believe is fundamental in Antarctic governance and also science. While the Antarctic Treaty System envisions Antarctica as a space for peaceful, inclusive, and collaborative science, one aspect of inclusivity often overlooked is the role of language. With around 7,000 languages spoken around the world, linguistic diversity is one of humanity's richest forms of cultural heritage. Yet, this diversity is often overlooked in international governance, including, of course, Antarctica. Today, I'll share how addressing linguistic barriers and fostering multilingualism and plurilingualism can help align Antarctic governance with its foundational principles and also with equity, diversity, and inclusiveness. Antarctic governance operates in a predominantly English-speaking framework. I think today's meeting is proof of that. This creates systemic barriers for stakeholders who are non-native English speakers. Research from SCAR's EDI initiatives and recent ATCM reports highlight how language affects participation. Namely, scientific discussions often marginalize perspectives from non-native English speakers. Decision-making becomes less representative when stakeholders cannot express themselves fully or feel constrained by language. Furthermore, linguistic inequity extends beyond verbal communication. Scientific publications, protocols, and governance documents are mostly published in English, reinforcing disparities in access to information and participation. Consider the growing emphasis on inclusivity in Antarctic science. For instance, SCAR's 2023 report stressed the importance of diversity, including linguistic diversity, to achieve more representative science. Similarly, ATCM discussions in 2023 and last year raised concerns about equitable access to governance mechanisms. However, gaps remain. Policies advocating for equity often fail to include language as a key dimension. They just don't name it. Practical solutions such as multilingual outreach or advanced translation tools remain underexplored. To address these challenges, I'm not just criticizing here, I'm going to propose some ideas. I suggest integrating linguistic equity into Antarctic governance through 3 possible actions. Number 1, encourage multilingual communication in ATS documents and SCAR initiatives to reach broader audience. Number 2, develop clear protocols for the inclusion of non-English languages in meetings. And number 3, utilize artificial intelligence tools like machine translation and natural language processing. These proposals demonstrate that linguistic equity today is achievable. To conclude, linguistic equity in Antarctic governance isn't just about addressing a technical issue. It's about creating a system that truly embodies the ATS's principles of peace and collaboration, not to name also transparency, mentioned so many times this afternoon. By fostering multilingualism and plurilingualism, we can ensure all voices, not just those fluent in English, are heard and valued. If the principles of peace and collaboration are to define Antarctic governance, we cannot afford to overlook the linguistic diversity that connects us. With over 7,000 languages worldwide, addressing language is no longer optional, it's essential. Thank you, and I welcome your thoughts on this critical topic.
Right, thank you. I think we have a variety of topics covered in this panel discussion, although it is entitled Natural Reserve, Annex 6, and CEP agenda and role of science, also tourism and diversity issues. But let me just begin with the Annex 6 questions. If there are questions, then perhaps I can ask Professor Takamura and Professor Kari to respond. Are there any questions from the floor? Or yes, please.
Thank you. So I was wondering, how could we end such long waiting periods? I mean, 20 years, that's almost just as long as I live, plus minus 5 years. So could there be, for example, a time limit to implement that the parties, for example, have 5 years to implement it, to actually put it on the plate and have it as a priority for the parties to domestically implement those measures? Because otherwise, I mean, 20 years, how long will it take from now on? 30 years, 40 years? What then? So is there anything that we could look forward to as like a time limitation? Thank you.
Okay, then can I ask also Professor Chen to put forward your questions too, so that, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for discussing Annex 6, since this is the topic we discussed last year, and from the Japanese perspective. You said that the main difficulties is how to evaluate the amount of the cost which has been paid by the operator. This is the main one. But from the Chinese perspective, I think that the main difficulty is that we have no very high level legislation to incorporate the whole ATS and particularly the Annex 6. But the good news is the comprehensive legislation, Antarctic law, is under the process at the National Congress level. And so maybe in the future, like the Japan, we will also incorporate Annex 6 into the domestic law. My personal opinion is that I think the liability annex here, we should identify the so-called liability. Annex 6 adopt the bifocal approach, liability for the state operator and the liability for the non-state operator, right? We should only incorporate the Annex 6 into the domestic law for the non-state operator liability. So the first thing is that the national law, we should determine the jurisdictional court. That the Annex 6 gave a very clear guidance which court will have the jurisdiction towards such kind of cases. The second one is we should identify what kind of civil liability it is. Is a tort liability or non-tort liability? We should identify. I think it's unlike the traditional cross-border environmental damage. It's quite different from the normal cross-border environmental damage system. So we should identify or qualify what kind of claim, what kind of issues. And then we should know what kind of law, applicable law, will be applied to govern. And also the difficulty you mentioned, that how to evaluate the amount for the cost. I think this is about the so-called evidence collection. Who will have the obligation to provide evidence to prove the amount the non-operator has paid, right? Has paid. So we need the system, a comprehensive system of domestic law to incorporate the Annex 6 into the domestic law. And so far, I know that there's only 9 countries has not ratified the Annex 6, including the 4 Asian countries, of course, also including China, and also the U.S. I'm not quite sure whether, Professor, whether the U.S. so far has not ratified the Annex 6 and incorporate it into their domestic law. I think maybe U.S. is an example, is a model we should learn from. Do you have any idea about that? Thank you.
So we have a question that is very professional, technical, and practical, and we have a question that is very general and fundamental. Now, depending on different systems, so like jurisdiction, so I will just ask, especially both of you, how we can deal with it, and how we can work together, perhaps, to shorten the period. Please.
Thank you very much, both. Who posed the question. I think it's, as our chair said, that it's quite professional questions. I hope that Carrie, Dr. Carrie could take some kind of follow-up to me, but then I start responding to the questions. To first questions, I think the ratification actually increased, in my understanding, quite this. I think this 1 decade. I mean 10 years. I mean the first 1 decade. Maybe some are very the Conservative Party look each other how to respond, how to implement this liability annex. That is maybe one of the reason for delay. The second is the point that I like to say is that the implication that you mentioned. I briefly mentioned that since it's liability annexes they adopted 20 years ago, there's some kind of maybe adaptation, adjustment maybe necessary after enter force. But maybe more important implication is that maybe you suggested the delay of the environmental protection in the Antarctic continent. But I think I wish to ask maybe the other expert and the Antarctic research. Actually, this environmental emergency incident actually did not really happen for 2 decades, if I'm not mistaken. If such kind of thing happened, actually that might have accelerated the action to be taken under this liability annex. But still, if take more time, I think maybe ATCM may consider that what kind of provisional action could be taken, since I think the majority of the Conservative Party will ratify. I hope that Japan will be one. Then there is some kind of early action could be facilitate to the implementation, if such kind of action could be agreed, of course, in the ATCM. Second question to the Professor Shin. Actually, maybe the comment is not really fully expressed our situation, and our main challenge for the ratification is that it's as the Professor Kari mentioned that it's quite a special, liability scheme that our legal system have never experienced actually. So when we consider the national implementation for the ratification, we consider that what kind of precedent exists, and try to incorporate better into the national legal system to be consistent with our legal system. So I think it's then this special liability regime, since it is Antarctica, it's very special, from the international laws perspective as well. But that is some kind of that is another reason why that we took some time to consider it. You explained well the system of liability, and then we of course consider the jurisdiction issues, And the other, we consider that the state operator's liability is already the government actually take this responsibility even without national legislation. So then we focus on the non-state operator for Japan to implement this, liability. I think I stop here. Then I bring.
Well, yes, thank you. Thank you, Professor Takamura, for your answers. I think you addressed most of these, but I can add some points as well. So thank you once again for all the questions. First of all, the question of can we make a time limit? Since this is about national implementation in sovereign states, I think it's usually up to very patient diplomacy and dialogue. So I haven't thought of a way to impose a time limit, and it probably wouldn't really align with the consensus-based model in the Antarctic Treaty system. But what we could do is increase and facilitate more dialogue, even if it sounds a little bit straightforward, but that is my opinion. And this perhaps, well, I'll return to that. On the questions of the particular issues that were raised, I'm happy to leave it there with Professor Takamura's answer. I just want to note two observations that I've made when I've been reading a little bit about these implementations is that indeed the drafters intended the implementation to be one of maximum flexibility so that it would allow states to find their own solutions. So there is no one clear and narrow target to hit. It's a broader range of options. And I think lately what we may have been kind of discovering a little bit is that states have found ways to address their concerns about the limits of public and private. And it seems that the Annex 6 itself, it provides states with many options with which they can ensure that in case of a liability event, the states have the sort of freedom and prerogative to act and to take care of things first themselves. Also when it's about their private or non-state actors. Now, without going further into detail, this is my understanding that this is probably something that many of the people dealing with implementation, what they're looking for. And it sounds like there are options out there and we might bring them together. Well, we got a straightforward question about the United States implementation. Obviously, I don't have an answer. I do understand that they have made plans and drafts, and these are queuing there in their decision-making progresses in the administrations. The only thought I have in mind is that maybe they should be invited along here in Kobe in the workshops and to involve in the discussion just like everyone else. There are many liability regimes going on in the world, and one positive thought I might have in general is that the Antarctic environmental liability regime might not be the most contested one. So it could be that in the situation where there are many ongoing projects, this could be one that could catch the wind and attention from all kinds of governments. But that's all I have on that front. Finally, on how to shorten the period, well, I've been repeating the word of dialogue, and I think we could think of a way to actually put forward a little bit of a process of actually bringing together the different civil servants and officials from different governments who are involved, whose responsibility and whose job it would be to implement Annex 6, and to bring them together with people familiar with the liability annex, or even the people who drafted the liability annex. If we could somehow promote the idea among the parties, there could be an intersessional physical meeting, and that might help people establish the connections with other actors in similar positions, so that they would know whom to ask. They could share their own experiences, and all we could do is facilitate and try to help people reach out to one another. But for example, for Professor Takamura, who has here now just been working in a group like this, I think her knowledge and expertise would be of great value to others who are facing a similar task. So if we facilitated something along those lines, it might be a good idea. Thank you.
All right. I'm becoming very wary of remaining time. So if there is one quick question concerning, say, environmental decision-making and science interaction, or tourism, or EDI, maybe we can entertain one quick question, then go on to the next part of today's discussion. If there is anyone asking. All right, please.
Thank you for the opportunity for having, and I just make it really brief because I'm just wondering, as you Natasha mentioned, I so agree on the significance of SCAR, and because not only to identify who is responsible, liability on this issue, and but also the scientific information transparency. But I understand on that, but still there is a lot of things going. I don't want to say this conflict. I would say disagreement among consultative parties, even the presence of SCAR, because some parties, they just say this is not scientific something to others, like based on their own scientific research, even with the SCAR. So even though I really agree on the significance of SCAR, but I think this is really inevitable, I guess. So I just want to make question for every one of you, because I think we can say this could be disagreement, or maybe we can say this is diverse opinion on this. So once we try to improve the transparency for information, it can be, I don't know, it could be either way, a measure to secure diverse opinion or just cooperation. But I'm just wondering the opinion from all of you. It could be diverse, maybe. So the transparency for information can be distract diverse opinion, or could be international cooperation. So I'm just wondering one of you's
This is not really an easy question, but can you quickly comment on that?
Yeah. So your question reminded me of the very probable interconnection with what Natasha pointed out on the one hand, what Ms. Rodriguez pointed out on the other. So if scientific expertise of SCAR become more and more contested, I imagine that one of the reasons why is that probably the SCAR scientific expertise is really dominated by English or English-speaking scholars. So which might have very strong connection with what you pointed out. So maybe we should refer to, explore, and better understand the scientific resources from other language-speaking countries, French, Spanish, Russian, Chinese, or whatever. Unfortunately, I personally don't have the magic solution to this because as Japanese speaker, what I can read and understand and digest is English resources as well as French resources, because I'm a French speaker. But we should always have to have in mind that aspect. And I think really we should explore and examine what could be the solutions to these situations, including the better utilization of the AI, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, that's a comment on it.
Well, I myself take a view, language is not the only factor. But if I start to disagree, then discussion will be very difficult. So maybe we can try to naturally wrap up today's discussion. Well, in accordance with the time program, I should say something about governance challenges facing the upcoming ATCM. And then I also have Professor Shibata, one issue remaining for general discussion. So I will just say something very quickly. I have been thinking that the officials, delegates, and academics coming to the Antarctic Consultative Parties meeting will not be able to do something directly to cut the emission, perhaps. But still, the Antarctic community can do two things at least. We can emit very powerful message to the rest of the world regarding climate change and other relevant issues. And secondly, we can provide kind of sample case, a model that is very appropriate and ideal and exported to the rest of the global community. But I think these days we have been importing troubles from outside the Antarctic to inside the Antarctic. So if we can just face these governance challenges for the following 3 meetings, if you work hard, maybe we can make some difference. On that context, to me, climate change is still the most significant that impacts the Antarctic and Southern Ocean and connects these regions to the rest of the world. So apparent lack of focused attention continuing or sustained for a good number of sufficient length of years, apparent lack of this is a governance challenge. I think we should pay enough attention to climate change and related issues. Maybe I can stop here and I can ask Professor Shibata, you have one issue for general discussion. Can you work on that? Is it too tight?
If you allow I think us to maybe have the final, I don't know, wrap up, thoughts, summarized maybe. I remember, 30 years ago, attending the Wilton Park Antarctic Governance workshop, and Tucker Scully from the United States, he said that the governance challenges are mostly from the domestic oriented. So enemy is inside. I think that is the issue now. I think I have heard too many excuses of not going forward, and with regard to the international diplomatic exercises at the ATCM, I think it is the responsibility of the delegation that they solve those domestic issues and come to the ATCM and negotiate and achieve the results within those 2 weeks. And you just cannot try to accommodate your domestic constituencies during the meeting at the ATCM. You have to solve them before coming to the ATCM. But I think Mr. Nakamura's keynote today has reflected many of the important issues for that to be achieved. I think it's the process to the ATCM and also between the ATCMs. And specifically, I think he mentioned about when the science or scientific discussions are somehow used as an excuse for political reasons. And he used the term severance in discussing the science in order to tease out those politically oriented reasons being excused by or hidden by the scientific discussions. I think that's very important. And we thought those intersessional consultations and the SCAR documents processes, we thought that has been done, that those scientific discussions coming to the ATCMs were already done, so that the science is already there, and so that the ATCM, at the political level, they can decide on it. But it seems like it is not happening nowadays. So my suggestion for the next few ATCMs is to revitalize this intersessional consultations, both diplomatic and also the science, and how the SCAR's document processes coming to the ATCM would incorporate much more participation from the different scientists, hopefully using some other different languages, but of course we do have a limited capacity, both financially and also technical issues, that we cannot have all the time the translations for the scientific discussions within the SCAR. But I think we should ask and request the SCAR working groups and the small groups so that they can incorporate more scientists into the process coming to a SCAR science advice for the ATCM. And hopefully, for example, the Annex 6 intersessional informal consultation last year we had, led by Australia, was attended only by 6 consultative parties. So I'm sorry to mention it, but China, India, Brazil, those are the countries who have not ratified the Annex 6. They did not participate in this intersessional consultation. Japan did, and the US did. And so this, again, we should revitalize this intersessional consultation that when we have the ATCM, we have a certain direction in order to achieve the result at the ATCM. So my suggestion, following the Mr. Nakamura's intervention, is to revitalize this intersessional consultation at the more pragmatic and practical means, involving many scientists and involving the interested consultative parties into the consultations. But that's my view. Thank you.
Right. We have intersessional mechanism in place, like ICG, intersessional contact group. How we can encourage more widespread participation is another issue. And sometimes it is very frustrating to conclude with more dialogue. But if it comes to intersessional consultation with SCAR community, it certainly has to be looked at again and revitalized. I am not entirely optimistic by talking to SCAR we can solicit always uncontested objective advice. People will have different views even within SCAR community. But if, let's say, CEP can send very specific requests that we are seeing this as an emerging issue, and I need your specific advice on certain aspects, or vice versa, if some scientific community out of this research, recent research findings, this has certainly environmental management ramification. So you should look at this. If there is a somewhat established mechanism developing, between science community and officially with SCAR and CEP, I think this can be a development. I tend to think so. Okay, looking at... Yeah, please.
Sorry, I feel bad because I didn't answer your question at the back. But just very briefly, this is really interesting. And while I did talk about the importance of SCAR, which I stand firmly by, I also think we have to be very careful in balancing how much we ask SCAR to do, because SCAR is a voluntary, mostly just passion-driven organisation. And yeah, there are many routes through which science arrives at those meetings, and one of them, of course, is via national delegations. And I think that the CEP members do have to also take responsibility, and this comes back to where resources are allocated also at the domestic level, because there's many science questions that, each of the parties need to go home and kind of address with their own science communities at that domestic level as well. So there's many routes through which science flows through the system. SCAR is one key route through which it does, but I think a balance has to be struck with how much the CEP requests from SCAR, because it's becoming an increasing workload. There's responsibility on both sides there.
Yes, I think that's true, and I think it's the responsibility of the ATCMs to really focus on which advice that they really want. I mean, it's under CEP to ask for the SCAR, and sometimes I do sense that some parties will actually ask for the SCAR advice just to delay the issue, and I think we should be very careful not to allow that. And so the request for the SCAR advice from the CEP or even from the ATCM specifically for achieving a result, having the advice from the CEP and ATCM. So thank you very much for that. Yeah.
I have a sense this can be a very long discussion, but okay. But anyway, according to the program we wrote together, in about 5 minutes or even less than 5 minutes, I should be able to say class dismissed or something. I am perhaps leaving this afternoon session very touched and very updated and enlightened. Now, I am a big fan of back to the basics. I dearly buy the concept of back to the basics. Let's remind ourselves that how the Antarctic really started. But at the same time, we should not stop evolving. This is very different time from the 1959. This is very different time. So there is a new emerging risks and opportunities, so we should not stop evolving. And again, compared to the time of like very geopolitical tension and suspicion about the nuclear weapons, and then extractive use of natural resources, and then environmental concerns. Now we're running into a time of very different kind of, or apparently, geopolitical tension, and also climate change, which is quite rapid, although not happening tomorrow night, so that people are less concerned. But there are a number of issues that we cannot just sit down and escape. So our efforts will continue. Perhaps we will try to organize a seminar at Italian ATCM, and also we will try to have the third workshop within this year, perhaps a little earlier than December. So you will be updated and communicated. Perhaps, but I will turn to Akio for remaining administrative announcements and other details.
Well, thank you again, and especially to Director General Kazuhiko Nakamura for that excellent keynote speech, which actually framed our discussions today. And thank you also for the participants for the very active engagement of the discussions. Again, we haven't solved anything, but I think this kind of a dialogue and the discussions among the experts and also the public would be very important going towards the ATCM in Hiroshima in 2026 and maybe in Korea in 2027. So this is exactly the reason that we are having those occasions for the dialogues and discussions. So thank you very much. And the class is dismissed, Professor. Okay, thank you very much. The workshop is closed. Thank you.